Former Congressman Charlie Dent, welcome to the Dispatch podcast.
Hey, great to be with you, Jamie.
Well, we are recording this on Friday. This will be published on Monday, the day before the presidential election. And on the presidential election, the day of the president, everyone's going to be looking at one state mainly. They talk about a few others, but Pennsylvania is the state that I think the eyes of the country will be on. So I want to start just by getting your sense of what is happening in the state and on the ground. What do you view as the state of the race right now in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, it's obviously it's very tight. At least according to all the public polling, seems to be a very tight race. It seems to me, though, that I keep hearing stories this week that women seem to be turning out in larger numbers, which if you're on Team Harris, that's probably good news. And so I'm hearing that on the ground. I'm not sure if it's backed up by empirical data, but that's what's being said. But I'll tell you right now, if you're the Harris campaign, they need to do extremely well in the Philadelphia media market, and particularly the collar counties of Philadelphia, Bucks, Montgomery, Chester, and Delaware counties. She needs to run the score up there. She also needs to do extremely well in Philadelphia, although there is concern that she might not get the margin she needs out of Philadelphia. She'll win it big, but she needs to win it very big to the extent that to the extent that there is an erosion of support for Harris among African American males and Hispanics, that could cut into her margin in the city. So she'll have to do better in the suburbs around Philadelphia, around Allentown, Bethlehem, Harrisburg, and Pittsburgh. She'll really need to run up the score there as well as in the capital region. So that is really her challenge. And because I do think upstate, Trump is strong, clearly. And if you remember what happened in Pennsylvania in 2020, Donald Trump underperformed in 66 out of 67 counties relative to 2016, meaning that there was only one county in 2020 where Donald Trump did marginally 2020 than 16, and that was Philadelphia.
Mhm.
And then Trump said the election was stolen there. Well, not really, but but that's what he said. And to be more specific, Biden won the four collar counties of Philadelphia by a margin of about 285,000 votes. Hillary Clinton won them by about 185,000. So you can see the 100,000 vote differential. Trump won in 16, Pennsylvania by 44,000 votes. Biden won it in 2020 by 81,000 votes. So the question is, can Harris do better than Biden in those collar counties? And also in other communities, can she erode Trump's margin of victory in the states where he is strong, similar to what Biden did in 2020? And we don't know and I would say, if I'll make a prediction though, and it's one of the few predictions I'll make, it's actually two, that whichever candidate wins Northampton County, which is where Bethlehem and Easton are, and that was part of my old congressional district, whichever candidate wins that county will win Pennsylvania and and therefore win the presidency. But watch that county because it's one, and same with Erie County, Pennsylvania. But Bethlehem is probably, Northampton is probably a better bellwether than Erie, though. But look at those two counties because remember, Obama won them in 12, Hillary won them Trump won them in 16, Biden won them in 2020. And that county has been really good at determining the winner. And so watch that county. Now, I also expect that Harris might have an erosion of support up in Lackawanna County, where Scranton is. Remember, that's where Biden is from, Scranton. But Biden did marginally better than Hillary Clinton did up there. Although I think Hillary Clinton did actually better in the city of Scranton than Biden did.
Mm.
But it's a long way of saying that's a very white ethnic area. A lot of Italians, Irish, Lithuanians up there. And I'm not so sure that Harris will play as well. I think that county could actually go red. The neighboring county where Wilkes-Barre is, Luzerne County, has already gone full Republican in 2016 and 2020. I think that Lackawanna County, that's where Casey lives as well. I think that county is probably going to go red this time. That means Harris has to make up votes, like again, in these suburban areas, particularly where there are a lot of college-educated voters. She's going to have to really run up the score.
You mentioned the bellwether of Northampton. When I hear these names, my family, this is my
Right.
region of my family is
Yeah.
from. Um, is there an animating issue that you think motivates these voters or motivates them not to vote, that they get turned off to vote and don't come out for a certain candidate?
Yeah. Look, if you ask typical voters what's their big issue, they'll tell you it's the economy. But I think probably the greatest motivating issue that's really motivating voters is abortion. And I saw an interesting data point in a Muhlenberg College morning call poll a couple weeks ago for my old congressional district, which is probably the swingiest congressional district in the swingiest state. Okay, so you look at that, and what I found fascinating was that on the question of abortion, 73% of voters in that district thought that, and this is a dead even district in terms of registration, 73% thought that abortion should be legal most or all the time. 17% said it should be illegal most or all the time.
Mm.
Now, when I served, it was probably like about a 55-40 ratio. Now, so here we are post-Dobbs. It's clear that that issue has really changed in terms of how people self-identify. And based on what I'm seeing on the ground and what I've seen in polls too, it seems to be a motivating issue, even though it might not be the top issue
Mm.
for most voters. So keep an eye on that. And I think that's a really, I can't state that enough. Now, of course, Harris is a relatively new candidate. She's not as well defined. Trump has a low ceiling, but Harris has, I think, a little bit more growth potential. But I'm hesitant to go out there and say one candidate or the other is going to win. You know, like all these polls, Jamie, you know how this was in 2016 and 2020. They undersampled
Yeah.
non-college educated voters. Now in 2024, are they oversampling them?
Yeah.
Which I don't know the answer to that question.
Well, let me ask you, you mentioned the economy as often the case, the number one issue for voters. This is a pretty, and I feel like both parties are talking past each other. It is true that the economy, GDP growth, and the S&P 500 are very strong. It may be unusually strong where people expected it to be when the Fed started raising rates. On the other hand, ordinary voters who might not have that much invested in the stock market see prices that have gone up. And while inflation has decreased, it hasn't lowered prices. It's just the rate has gone up.
Right.
How do voters weigh these two sides of the economic question?
Well, the economic angst is clearly driven by inflation, by high prices. And you're right. Inflation spiked very precipitously a couple of years ago. And while inflation has abated, those high prices haven't come down. And so people are still kind of dealing with sticker shock, particularly as it relates to groceries and housing. And of course, the Lehigh Valley region, where I'm from in Pennsylvania, and much of eastern Pennsylvania, there's been a lot of population growth and there's increased demand for housing. And as you know, with higher interest rates, limited supply, many people are locked into their homes as they are with very low interest rates, and they're not selling. So there's a lack of inventory, and there's real pressure, particularly on younger voters or younger people who are trying to get into homes, but just they either can't afford the down payments or they can't afford the house. They're really struggling. And trying to, it's just not easy finding houses, particularly in the eastern part, I would say, particularly in the eastern, southeastern part of the state. So I think that's what's driving much of the economic angst. Now, each candidate saying they're going to try to bring prices down. Harris is talking about, price gouging or price controls, and Trump says he's going to magically lower prices while imposing across the board tariffs. Neither side really has a great answer to this, but that's driving the angst, and that's not playing to the advantage of the Democrats because they're the party in power.
Can you speak a little bit to the Puerto Rican community has obviously taken a bigger role in people talking about it on the media ever since the Madison Square Garden rally, where the comedian Tony Hinchcliffe made some jokes that probably were not appropriate for a political campaign, maybe anytime, but certainly not a presidential campaign. Do you think they could be the Puerto Rican community could be determinative? How big is the Puerto Rican community in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, those jokes did not land well in Allentown. In fact, the city of Allentown is about 55% Hispanic. And of that Hispanic population, it is predominantly, last I checked, it was probably of the Hispanic population, it's about 70% Puerto Rican. And then the second largest groups are Dominicans. But it's probably fair to say that all Latinos from the Caribbean were deeply offended by those remarks. And in Allentown, Bethlehem, Reading, and Lancaster, you have especially strong and large Hispanic populations. Again, mostly Puerto Rican populations. Philadelphia also has a significant population, but my old congressional district was probably in the top 6 in terms of a number of Puerto Ricans in the country. That mine and the one in Lancaster, Reading, were the two of the largest, two in the top 10. So I think the Hispanic vote is going to be consequential. And I think the Trump campaign made a major error by bringing that comedian on to call Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage or whatever he said. Really was a big error from what I can tell. And it was because Trump was in Allentown just a couple days ago. He
Right.
was there a couple days ago, and that was all the talk because that was 2 days after the Madison Square Garden performance. And in fact, by the way, Kamala Harris is coming to Allentown on Monday.
Hmm. Allentown becoming the center of
It's-
politics. Uh, would it make any? I mean, we're talking how close this race is in Pennsylvania, and obviously one of the criticisms back during the vice presidential search is that Kamala Harris didn't pick Josh Shapiro to be her running mate. Would this race be materially different in Pennsylvania if Josh Shapiro was the running mate?
Short answer is I think the answer is yes. At the time I said that I thought that Josh Shapiro was the obvious choice for vice president. And people said, why? I said, because of Pennsylvania. She needs to run up the score in the Philadelphia media market. He's especially strong there. If you look at where Josh Shapiro won and Joe Biden won, Josh Shapiro won in a lot more places than Biden did. And if you look at Minnesota, the map of Minnesota, and you see where Joe Biden won and Tim Waltz ran, they basically won in the same places. And so I thought, and I know Tim Waltz, I'm a friend of his, and we served together for 12 years. We went to Afghanistan together, got stuck at the Bagram Base in a snowstorm, so we know each other. But I think that Shapiro would have brought more value to the ticket. Not that people vote for number two, but I think it would have given more of a permission structure to some of these wavering Republicans and independents who just don't like Trump, but quite can't get there on a Democrat. That Shapiro would have given that extra edge. I think he certainly would have. And should Kamala Harris lose the election, I think people are going to look at that decision and maybe question it.
Well, you just said you know Tim Walz and you
Yeah,
served with him.
good
Uh,
man.
what do you make of the person you know versus what has become the media perception of Tim Walz?
Yeah, well, but I knew Tim, as a Democrat in Congress, he was pretty moderate. He had a strong Second Amendment record. And I remember when he was running for governor, I remember chatting with him, and he was getting a lot of pressure from the left wing of his party. He wasn't left enough. And so, okay, so he wins that nomination, becomes governor. And I think it's probably fair to say that he was a more progressive governor than he was a congressman. And so that's kind of how I knew Tim. So I really haven't had a lot of contact with him since 2018. And I know Josh Shapiro well too, but that was my perception. More of a moderate congressman, a little bit populist, but more moderate. But probably he inched over a few clicks to the left when he became governor of the state of Minnesota.
Just on a technical basis on election night, are we going to get results quicker in Pennsylvania than we did 4 years ago? I mean, when will we know who won Pennsylvania?
Well, as you recall, in 2020, it took us until Saturday after the
Yeah.
election to get the final outcome. And unfortunately, the Pennsylvania General Assembly failed to pass a law that would allow for the pre-canvassing or processing of those mail-in votes. They cannot process those votes until 7 a.m. of election day. And right now, last I checked, there was well over 1 million mail-in ballots. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is during the pandemic, I think we had significantly more mail-in ballots than we do now. And again, that was our first time. 2020 was our first experience in Pennsylvania dealing with mail-in voting on this scale. No excuse absentee voting is what it is. As the most, and so it took us until Saturday. I don't think it'll take that long this time, but I do think it will take a couple days. It
Hmm.
might take us into Wednesday or Thursday, perhaps. I don't think it'll go out as far as Friday or Saturday. I'm hoping it will be done sooner. They're better I think they are better now at processing canvassing than they were. And also remember too, on these mail-in ballots, Democrats in Pennsylvania voted by mail at a rate about 3-1 relative to Republicans. There's a 3-1 ratio. And so if you remember what happened in 2020, Donald Trump was up on election day. He had more votes than Biden. But when you looked at the massive numbers of mail-in votes that had not been counted, Democrats had cast those at a rate of 3-1. And then, of course, we saw the red mirage, blue wave. That's what happened. And then Biden won by about 81,000 votes. So I think we might have a little bit of that. But as I said, the Republicans have closed the gap a bit on mail-in voting. Democrats still voting much stronger at that level, but not nearly to the extent they did in 2020. The advantage has been cut.
Why does the legislator not pass laws like some other states where you can start processing these sometimes even before the election?
Oh, it's a great question. It's just the dysfunction. When the Senate's controlled by Republicans, the House is controlled by Democrats, and each side, when they try to pass a bill, they add poison pills, and they just can't reconcile it. You think they could just clean this up in a conference committee, clean out the garbage and just allow for the pre-canvassing, but it's become enormously politicized, and I'm not so sure that some Republicans and Trump in particular wanted them necessarily to fix this, because I think he wants to be able to complain after
Hmm.
to say that oh, they're cheating again, and look at this, I have the lead and now I'm losing the lead. And I think there's some of that the politics that's also infected this issue in Harrisburg.
You came out in support of Kamala Harris, or you
Yeah.
voted for
Yeah.
her. We had David Frum a couple of weeks ago make the conservative case for the vice president. We had Hugh Hewitt last week make the conservative case for Donald Trump. What was your reasoning behind supporting the vice president?
Well, my reasoning was that Donald Trump is really not a conservative. He's an illiberal populist, and I happen to think he's unfit for office. I've actually met him. I've been in meetings with him. I've seen it firsthand. I've seen the ADD, the impulse control issues, the narcissism on a Titanic scale, all wrapped in a volcanic temper. He has zero interest in public policy. He continues to make stunningly disqualifying comments, just like he did yesterday about Liz Cheney, and talking about putting her in front of a firing squad, and now we're debating whether or not he meant to execute her or not. I mean, seriously, these are the kinds of conversations that
Well, in fairness, Congressman, I do think that not to defend him and makes it
yeah,
any better, he was talking about putting her in the army and throwing her in Afghanistan or something like that.
I just the whole thing is bizarre, and he's just but he continues to want to go after his enemies. That seems to be the point. He's just and on economic policy, again, from a conservative standpoint, there's nothing conservative at all about across the board tariffs at 10 to 20% on virtually everything coming into this country from everywhere. This is going to protect the privileged few at the expense of the many. This will be inflationary. This will be enormously detrimental to American manufacturing and agriculture. And as a conservative, I just don't understand how anybody can stand there and with a straight face and say this is great. This is the hardcore AFL-CIO policy, frankly. That's where they want to be. And so some of us as Republicans just think that we have to have some respect for free markets. We also should, of course, respect the rule of law and the constitutional order. Many of us, as center right or conservative people, believe that that the January 6th was an abomination. And I'm one of the leaders of an organization called Our Republican Legacy, established by former Senators Jack Danforth and Bill Cohen and Alan Simpson, where we lay out 5 principles. The Constitution, rule of law, constitutional order. We thought January 6th was an abomination. We're for the Union, like our founder, Abraham Lincoln, who wanted to keep our great country together and not divide it. We're for free markets. We're against these types of across the board broad-based tariffs that are inflationary and will be economically destructive. We're for a robust national security posture that embraces allies and rejects brutal autocrats like Vladimir Putin, who have territorial ambitions on democratic nations. We also think we have to have a conversation about fiscal responsibility once again, and neither party's talking about that. So these are the principles that we think sustain the Republican Party for 170 years. MAGA's roots are rather shallow, and they've been around for about 10 years, and that's rather thin gruel what they're pushing with this illiberal populism, nativism, isolationism, protectionism, and at times nihilism. I mean, that's what they're pushing, and we think that's a dead end.
How many other Republicans do you think there are like you in Pennsylvania? I mean, will Republicans who turned on Trump be potentially a deciding factor, or is it a small number of dissenters?
I think it's about 10%. And that's one thing I'm looking at in all this polling data. I just saw a poll the other day suggesting that Harris had about 94% of the Democratic vote and Trump about 90% of the Republican vote. And it seems to me that Pennsylvania is a closed primary state. And you may remember that Nikki Haley secured around 17% of the vote statewide in a closed primary several weeks after she had dropped out of the campaign. And in the collar counties of Philadelphia, she was doing better than 20% of the Republican vote. So I guess what I'm suggesting is that there are a lot of dispirited, dissatisfied Republicans who do not want to vote for Donald Trump. Now, whether or not they vote for Kamala Harris is another matter. Some of them may, some of them may not. But there clearly are many of them are going to take a walk on this at the top of the ticket. And remember what happened in 2020. While Donald Trump was losing the state by 81,000 votes, we had statewide row offices for Auditor General and Treasurer, one an open seat and the other defeating an incumbent, one winning by 300,000 votes, one by 100,000 votes. My point is Republicans down ballot, not named Donald Trump, were doing rather well in Pennsylvania in 2020. In the legislature, in the Congress, and certainly in the statewide row offices. And so that could happen again, where you have a lot of Republicans who just don't vote at the top of the ticket or vote for Harris and then vote Republican down ballot to place a check. And by the way, we saw that happen in other states too in 2020.
Congressman, you mentioned January 6th, and I wonder, you talking to your colleagues, what they were outraged on that day. Most of them in the House have decided to rally around Donald Trump. How did they get from outrage? I brought this up with Hugh Hewitt in my podcast with him and how he justifies his vote. That 3 hours in particular where Donald Trump was in the dining room off the Oval Office, he got a call from Kevin McCarthy, and he said, "Well, it seems like these people care more about the election than you." He was told about his vice president being under threat. He goes, "So what?" How do your colleagues in the House who are backing Trump, how did they get around and rationalize a day they were so angry about at the moment?
Well, I think they've rationalized it because their voters have nominated Donald Trump once again. I think that's how they do it. And frankly, I think Kevin McCarthy made a mistake by letting Trump off the mat when he went down to Mar-a-Lago a few weeks after those events of January 6th and more or less buried the hatchet. And look, there were only maybe 10 House Republicans who voted to impeach Donald Trump. I can assure you there was a lot more support in the House Republican Conference for impeachment than there were votes. They just didn't do it. And then, of course, the Senate had the chance, and then they walked away from it. They could have put an end to all this. But I think that's going to be one of the great regrets of many of these members, particularly if Trump loses again this time. If he loses again this time, I mean, at some point, the Republican Party has to get focused on winning again. Trump, unfortunately, has made losing great again. He's done that. I mean, since you look at what happened in 2018, we got wiped out. The House, that is, 2020, lose the Senate, lose the presidency. 2022, Republicans significantly underperform in the midterm when they shouldn't have. So you have to start asking yourself, why would they continue to back this guy? And you can look at the Democrats. I give them a lot of credit. They had a problem with Joe Biden at the top of their ticket. But they're serious about winning. They saw the down ballot damage. They saw that he probably wouldn't win the White House, and they replaced him. And some people are saying, "Oh, isn't that nasty?" Well, that's what political parties do. They exist to win, and you win to govern. And it seems that the Republican National Committee is more concerned about placating and ameliorating Donald Trump, keeping him happy rather than win elections. And we all know that if Nikki Haley were the candidate right now, she'd probably be walking away with this election.
Where do you see the future of the Republican Party, both if Donald Trump wins on one side and if he loses? I mean, is there a normal Republican Party that comes out in 2028 with a normal Republican presidential candidate, or is MAGA in control?
Well, right now, MAGA is clearly in control, but the Republican Party is divided. It is not evenly divided, but it is divided nonetheless. If he loses, I think, at least I believe, that the conversation about the future of the party will take on added importance because we'll be in the wilderness, at least in terms of the presidency, losing again. And I think what would happen is that would force us, to talk about some of the things I just laid out. Do we want to be a party based on principles? And I'm not naive, and I don't think most of us are naive that we're going to go back to where we were. But we know that we need to get to a better place. And the MAGA agenda of isolationism, protectionism, nativism, I just don't see this as a winning recipe long term. And again, rather than having a party really be about really loyalty to one individual and whatever he happens to believe on a given day, We need to get back to guiding and sustaining principles like those that I mentioned earlier that sustained us for 170 years and frankly can lead us into the future. Because those principles I laid out, those would not only be embraced by most Republicans, by one hell of a lot of independents, and I would argue in a whole bunch of Democrats. But we have to become a more broad-based party. Once again, also, I would suggest that we do probably need to moderate on the abortion issue. I mean, this is an issue that post-Dobbs, Republicans need to come to the realization that what some of our colleagues in the states around the country are doing, passing these abortion bans with no exceptions, with no exceptions, 6-week ban, no exceptions other than the life of the mother. Well, guess what? Those probably enjoy about the support of about 5% of the public on the wrong side of that issue. And, then people say, well, our problem is a messaging problem. It's a communication problem. I say, no, it's not. It's a policy problem. We have to fix the policy. And so that's another issue. And at least Trump, he's trying to moderate on that issue, but he's an imperfect messenger, given where he was on Roe and given what he did, with all his statements on that issue, on the criminalized women who have abortions and punish them and that sort of thing. So he's not the right messenger, although they did modify the plank and the platform a little bit, which was actually helpful, but it's not enough.
Do you think the Republican Party can get back to a point where you could imagine? I mean, you had been in the past mentioned as a statewide candidate for governor or Senate. Do you think the party can get to a point where someone like you, who didn't vote for Trump in any of the elections that he ran in, could run and win office?
Oh, I don't know. Look, parties change. All I know is that the Republican Party of Pennsylvania, really was the party of Bill Scranton Sr. And out of that came people like Dick Thornburgh and John Hines and Tom Ridge and Mark Schweiker and Dick Schweiker, Hugh Scott. I mean, we had a lot of people who would win statewide. Arlen Specter. We had all these people who won statewide, who I could argue were, who really did reflect the state. And they were considered a bit more moderate, frankly, most of them who did win statewide. And again, we're not winning. When Donald Trump says, "Hey, let's put up a guy like Doug Mastriano," or Mehmet, who was wholly unfit and an absolutely horrific candidate by any measure, this was the guy. And you throw away an election, and then and even Mehmet Oz. I mean, he's not a bad man. He's a smart guy, but he never lived in the state. And when the Republican establishment was going with McCormick, he was going with Oz. And you replicate that not just in Pennsylvania, but Herschel Walker in Georgia. Didn't know how many kids he had. There were spousal abuse issues that he admitted to. Then you got Mark Robinson in North Carolina, who apparently is a black Nazi, apparently, and just a wild candidate, but endorsed by Trump. Tudor Dixon in Michigan, Kerry Lake in Arizona. I mean, how many times do we have to throw away winnable races in battleground states because of one man's utterly poor judgment in his candidate selection? I mean, that's what I get back to. I said, do we really want to win elections? If we wanted to win elections, we would never put up people like this. And those
yeah. Speaking of the Senate, did you split tickets? Did you vote for McCormick, or did you vote for?
No, well, I am in my day job. I run the Aspen Institute congressional program, so I kind of try to stay out of congressional races as best I can. But I suspect a lot of Republicans are going to be, who are dispirited, may be voting Republican straight down ballot. But I've been staying out of legislative races just for that reason, because of my day job.
Let me close on this. Yeah. It's election night tomorrow, Tuesday, when this is published. What piece of data will you be looking to as the polls close in Pennsylvania before they call the result in Pennsylvania that make you think it's going one way or the other? Where should viewers or listeners to this podcast look to?
I am going to watch Northampton County. Watch those county results. And by the way, in 2020, they were pretty quick. They had it all counted, I think, by Wednesday morning. And that's when I said Biden's going to win Pennsylvania. And I said somewhere between 50 to 100,000 votes. And it was 81. And I also watch Erie County, but I do think Northampton County is a better bellwether. I would also watch Bucks County, Pennsylvania. That's the most competitive of the 4 collar counties. I think Biden won that by 4 or 5 points. I'm curious to see if Harris does better there. She's going to need to do better there than Biden and the other collar counties, because I do think she needs to run up the score, because I think she could have a little bit of erosion in some other areas relative to Biden. So watch Northampton and Erie, Lackawanna, where Scranton is, and Bucks County. Those are the ones to watch. And hopefully we'll have relatively early returns from those counties.
Yeah, let's hope so. Charlie Dent, thank you for joining the Dispatch podcast.
Thank you, Jamie. Great to be with you.